Do not get shocked when I say that freebies in terms of unemployment, dole, free electricity and water, public transport, travel, etc., is the single biggest threat looming before the country. It is a threat that, in a sense, is bigger than a presumed conflict between India and its hostile neighbors, that is, China and Pakistan. You can go to war once with unreasonable and intransigent neighbors. But the freebie culture is the war within, which is continuous and a disease that corrodes the very vitals of the nation, crippling the country in perpetuity. The threat of this culture promises to strike deep in the Indian heart, ironically, at a time when the country is upbeat, its economy on an upswing, and its place in the world valued and assured. It is equally pointless identifying the political entities who are desperate to usher in this threat to the nation. We all know these entities. What is more important is to understand the devastation the freebie culture can bring about and to draw lessons from its ravaging in many parts of the Western world. I will explain all that in a minute, but first, a warm welcome to all viewers of the CAA show. CAA, as all of you know, is Conversations and Analysis, and my name is Juggi Bhasin. To watch this show, press the big red subscriber button on your screen. Subscription is, of course, completely free. Now, let us first understand what is a freebie. A freebie is putting money in someone's pocket at some other person's expense. No freebie, in an economic sense, is free. All money generated and consumed or directed to various channels does not materialize from thin air. A country like India cannot afford to keep printing money and throwing it away on doles. There would be consequences to that, the biggest being hyperinflation. And since governments are not the mafia or a Ponzi scheme or an entity that cooks books, money always leaves an audit trail, which means freebies can only happen when you rob Peter to pay Paul. A freebie is also low hanging, tempting fruit for out of power political outfits desperate to jockey back to power. Many irresponsible entities presently in our system are plucking the fruit because they dangle the freebie before the electorate as a bribe to gather their votes. It is as simple as that. The freebie in the hands of such short sighted and unscrupulous entities becomes a shortcut to bypass the system. Assuming, for instance, you offer an unemployment dole. A dole of this kind for any large state in India would probably eat up 80% of the budget of the state. If you carry out your promise, how will you run the state then? Where will the money come from to run other services in the state? The unscrupulous entity either only makes an election promise or forgets the promise when voted to power. One state government in India is precisely doing that. Or else, you overdraw money from the central pool. Assuming that is allowed, you then sink the state in debt to satisfy your lust for assuming power. And then there is another way. You start raising water and electricity rates for the honest taxpayer to balance the budget, which is the case of what I call robbing Peter to pay Paul. And lastly, when all these devices fail, you can always play the victim card and accuse the central government of discriminating against the state government for its due share in the central kitty. The fact of the matter is, freebies or the dole system, one way or the other, is bound to fail. But the problem with the freebies is that initially it appears like God's manna from heaven, till time goes by and you realize a pestilence has rained down on you. Why do I say that? A freebie disincentivizes hard work. If you're getting a free allowance week after week, will you be charged to go out and work? Look at the case of many countries in Europe wilting under the scourge of this freebie system. Many people used to dole and freebies have lost the will to work. In England, so many on the dole have become alcoholics and drug addicts. In neighboring France, the country has been racked with strike after strike because people don't want to put in more work, as was the intent in raising the retirement age in that country. In San Francisco, real estate prices in business districts have collapsed because the dispossessed can walk in anytime in stores and malls and rob them, and no one can lay a finger on them. This is what happens to people and cities who become used to a free for all culture, entitled culture where honest hard work is frowned upon and laziness, thievery, and entitled behavior is encouraged. It has become so bad in that city that the so called marginalized have pitched tents on broadwalks in the best districts where they receive dole and shoot their veins with heroin and other drugs. This is the state of affairs in developed countries. If we adopt this freebie culture, what will be our fate? We have hope in hell then. This perverted left socialistic bleeding hearts policy can only play havoc with a country's finances and its economic and even mental well-being. And finally, we must distinguish between freebies and genuine welfare. I support genuine welfare. That means you create conditions to enable the people to seek employment and raise his or her living standards. There is nothing wrong with that. You do that by developing infrastructure and subsidizing food. The Amma canteens, for instance, in Tamil Nadu, is a good and healthy example of this welfarism. To avoid this incoming catastrophe, an act of parliament is required that equates freebies and dole with bribe and bans it. But do our politicians have the foresight or the will and the maturity to take this step? That is the question of our times. And so on this note, I come to the end of this episode of the CAA show. Hope you really enjoyed this particular episode. If you like our show, do subscribe to us. And on this note, it's goodbye and cheers from my end.